Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're having a great Saturday. The fantasy formula is back and a little different this week. We've got a couple of absences from the show, namely Terry and Adam, but we are joined this week by a special guest who we've had on the show before, Zach from the Zach F1 YouTube channel. Welcome to the channel, Zach. Good to have you back again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's always a pleasure being on this channel. Always look forward to it. And yeah, thank you so much for having me back on.
Well, I did see you had a stream of your own going just before we jumped on here, and I think there's been quite a few interesting things so far we've seen in practice in Baku. So I'm really looking forward to slicing it up. We'll obviously have Adam and Terry back for the next show, but I'm sure we'll be able to do as much as possible in their stead. So looking forward to going through free practice and all of the other interesting simulations coming right up for the hour. I think we'll start with the free practice times as we usually do once they come up on screen here. I think the most interesting thing throughout the Friday and this morning sessions was that, Zach, I didn't really think there was an objectively best team. I thought all of the teams had their moments over the three sessions, but no one really showed to me they were the deserved, obvious best team.
I completely agree. Honestly, it's been one of the hardest race weekends for a little bit, picking especially that 2x driver. For me, it's coming down to, I think, McLaren and Ferrari. But even still, the Red Bull's pace, apparently long run pace, looks okay. Hopefully their straight line speed doesn't affect them too much. And then we still can't even count out Mercedes because, like we saw in practice 3, Russell putting it fastest. We might get surprised by them in the end.
I think as well, Red Bull on Friday showed they were a force to be reckoned with. And Perez in particular who's got a great record at this track, was in the top 3 in both FP sessions. Him and Max seem to be a little way down the order. And I thought for a moment we'd be dabbling with Red Bull, but it looks as though seems McLaren, Ferrari back on top as we might have expected before practice kicked off.
It's going to be a very good weekend, 100%. At least racing terms, but F1 fantasy times, there could be quite a few crashes, a lot of chaos. So very excited for it.
Yeah, well, hello to everyone in the chat. We'll cover off a few of the questions so far. Michael, great to have you here, and Michael again. Marcos, thanks for dropping by. Ali, Simone, Andy, and Adam, of course, great to have you in the chat, even if you're not able to join us. And yes, as Adam's pointed out, be sure to submit your teams in the fan out base because we will be covering them off a little later in the show. So thank you to all of you that have already submitted teams for review. I didn't catch free practice, Zach, and I said to you just off stream before we kicked off, it's the first race weekend I can remember in the last 2 years that I haven't even had the chance to watch one free practice session because of other commitments. I've obviously seen the times on the screen here, but Michael pointed out that Leclerc was summoned to the stewards for not slowing under a yellow flag. I know it's free practice. We don't typically see penalties assigned. It's usually a warning, maybe a fine of some kind. Do you think there's anything there on a possible grid penalty, or do you reckon it's just one of those
I'd
things
be very surprised. It's one of those things where, yeah, a little bit naughty, but he should get away with it, honestly.
Okay.
If he did get a penalty, yeah, very surprised.
Mike mentioned again that Terry thinks he might get a penalty, so monitor that. But I don't think. Well, let's see. We'll keep an eye on it. I've got Twitter open in the background in case there are any updates from Chris Medland and the like. So we'll keep an eye on that. One thing I also wanted to ask, and I think we'll be spending quite a bit of the show discussing this and questions around that, is the Sargent situation. I watched your rant you had on YouTube yesterday or the other day. I thought it was hit the nail on the head. And there's been quite a few questions. I think we've already got a couple from Ali, Andy, just around the use of the no negative, Logan Sargent in particular. What's your, in a nutshell, strategy for covering off people that do own Logan Sargent this weekend?
So for me, like you said, it really depends on what your team is like. So if you just have Sargent, it then depends on your team value as a whole. So if you've got 2 premium drivers, if you can have 2 premium drivers of either Piastri and Leclerc or Norris and Russell, I think then you can use your 2 free transfers or free transfers to take out Sargent, and then don't worry about the no negative. However, if you have both Magnussen and Sargent, I think it's without a doubt you use that no negative, because that is completely crazy. You have to use the no negative if you have those two in your team, because then getting rid of those two, it could completely ruin the entire rest of your team. So yeah, playing it safe, no negative if you 100% have Magnussen and Sargent. And then depending on your 2 premium drivers, if you have 2 good premium drivers, don't use it. If you have 2 bad premium drivers, then use it and try to work out your team elsewhere.
Yeah, I think as well, I would, to your point, would fully agree that the no negative has a lot of viability at Baku. It's got a lot of DNF history there, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit of first lap or early stage carnage, because it's been some time since, I think, Monaco or Canada is probably the last race we had a few tangles on the track, and it seems as though it's been pretty clean racing for the most part the last few races. I'm not suggesting that suddenly changes overnight, but I do think a track like Baku does carry some risk, and no negative at the best of times at tracks like this is a good strategy. You throw in Sargent, Magnussen, and then obviously Leclerc and Colapinto, I think, had incidents in FP1 as well. So there's a bit going on, and probably worth thinking about this week. So I like the no negative strategy for Magnussen and Sargent owners for sure.
I'd like to mention as well, someone mentioned as well in the chat, how do we know that no negative will cover inactive drivers? And I'll have to be completely honest, it's a risk you'll have to take. It's a situation that we've never really been in F1 Fantasy, and realistically, it makes complete sense for no negative to work on it because it covers any negative points you get, but there is that risk.
Yeah, we just don't know if it applies to inactive drivers, because there's already been so much controversy around these inactive drivers and what that means for their scores, their price. I would guess it should. In theory, it should. But I just don't know. As you say, it's a risk you have to be comfortable taking, and we'll just have to wait and see. I've activated it on my test team for this weekend, so we'll obviously have an answer by the end of it. But regardless, right now it's going to be an interesting one to see what happens. Why don't we cover off a couple of questions in the chat around lineups? I also just saw that the F1 Fantasy Tools simulations are up, so I'll bring them up in the meantime. Nice. Maybe we could cover off a couple more lineup questions. Ali's asked, she's got 3 McLaren and Mercedes and some extra budget with Albon, Colapinto, and Bottas. Thinking of keeping Mercedes and swapping Piastri for Leclerc and rolling a transfer. What do you think of that? Do you think it's a kind of a coverall basis, keeping Mercedes, go for Leclerc? Do you think we should be on the constructor instead? And then in terms of the 2X, Zach?
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those things where if Leclerc does win the race, of course, him being the ×2 is worth it. But I also think people have got to remember that Leclerc winning and starting P4 was a very weird situation last race weekend, where he scored like so many points. And I think it's just a safer thing to have the better constructors. So for me, I would try to push instead from Mercedes to Ferrari and focus on that instead of Piastri to Leclerc. So I'd try to move around the constructors instead, Ali.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Ferrari, even though Russell did have P1 in FP3, his in F1 Fantasy Tools, his projected points have also gone up a little bit compared to what it was FP2. So I think it's not a bad idea having Mercedes, but I do think Ferrari do seem like the better team across the board. Even if they do look pretty close in the constructors, I think Ferrari have just proven since Monza that they look to have the pace to keep with the top teams.
Yeah.
I think that kind of answers Durazum's question. Do you think Ferrari, Russell, or Mercedes, Leclerc? I think it's probably Ferrari, Russell for me.
100%. Always try to put more emphasis on getting Ferrari in. Because it could become a situation where I don't think it will happen, but there is a situation where Red Bull's race pace does come into play, and we see Mercedes down in like 7th and 8th.
Agreed. Yeah, that was the thing I was thinking about after free practice too, where Perez and Verstappen were right up there. And I was like, well, we know McLaren are good. We know Ferrari have some good race pace recently. I mean, Hamilton was actually inside the top three in both early free practice sessions and two, and then Russell obviously in FP3. But they do, as you say, feel like the odd team out a little bit, and I feel like the ceiling for them is maybe a fourth or a fifth this weekend. Whereas I think all of the other teams have a shot at podiums for at least one or both of their drivers.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Rafe Coco 99 has asked Norris, Russell, Albon, or Norris, Sainz, Zhou. I will say I've got the Norris, Sainz, Zhou lineup, but I also couldn't fault Albon around this track. I thought Williams looked really good in free practice, and Colapinto and Alex were both up in the top 10 in FP3.
I would like to mention with Zhou as an asset, it's one of those things where we've seen in the last few races it hasn't worked out for him. But at a track like Baku, where potentially being off the pace, because no offense to Zhou, normally he's about a lap down to everyone else. It means if he just stays out of trouble and there is a lot of crashes, he could start at the back of the grid and then come up to like P16, P15.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, he's been more or less the worst qualifier on the grid this season. So it's more than likely he starts in the bottom two spots on the grid. This essentially guarantees that. And also with the penalty, hopefully he's enough away from the carnage that if there's anything a little chaotic on that first turn, at least he's well away from that. I still expect him to be at the back of the finishing drivers, but if there's 3, 4, 5 DNFs, he'll hopefully gain a bit of a bump for positions gained for sure. NK, the questions are coming through thick and fast, so we'll try and stay on top of them as much as possible. Terry, great to have you on. But NK, I just found that a great question around no negative. I think Baku's a great track for the inactive situation. Other tracks we'd use it at, I'd say sprint race weekends because you've got that extra session of DNFs. But I also think, Singapore, Vegas, other street circuits, a little bit of risk too. Zach, any opinion on that?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. It's one of those things you just have to be comfortable with it. And if you're fine with it, I think it's a good option this weekend.
Definitely.
I'm seeing a question from Mark here. Mercedes, Norris, Leclerc, or Ferrari, Piastri, Leclerc? I think for me, like I said, I would focus on the constructor and move more over to a Ferrari, Piastri, Leclerc. It also then helps you out on that 2 times choice because honestly, having Norris and Leclerc in your team is a nightmare trying to choose the 2 times.
Definitely agree. I think, again, something, a few of us have covered off throughout the week is that it's very well documented around, the papaya orders and what that means for Lando Norris as a 2X option. I think Piastri has thrown his support behind Lando's charge for the championship for the next few races, assuming they have a good shot at winning the race. So it makes that decision between Norris and Leclerc a little tricky. I think if you're running Ferrari, who I think is the marginally better constructor, you've got an easy 2X decision made up for Leclerc, I think. So I don't unfortunately think Piastri is going to win any races anytime soon if Lando's right up there with him. But I think Leclerc still has half a shot for sure if Ferrari look good. And I think that kind of answers Patrick's question right after, is Leclerc and Mercedes or Piastri Ferrari? I'm assuming Piastri Ferrari are both of our answers to that question.
Yeah.
It's going to be close though, I will say. So we'll see how we go. A few hits have been flying around for teams this weekend, obviously around Sargent, Magnussen, and then, other transfers that people are looking at. Where was this question? Carla asked, should I swap Mercedes for Ferrari and for a -10? Is that worth it, Zach? I think it's going to be close. I'll throw my 2 cents in the ring. I think it'll be close. Do I see Ferrari outscoring Mercedes by 10? I'm not sure. I'd say possible, but I wouldn't say with absolute confidence.
It's one of those transfers, isn't it, where it's right on the cusp, and it really could all come down to, which is another thing that always comes into play, is the fastest pit stops. Honestly, and hopefully we'll see how that works out. But if Ferrari get Leclerc to win, then that -10 will work out. But let's say Leclerc's second, Sainz is fourth or fifth, then it really might push more back into Mercedes, and then taking that -10, if they're only if they're only 5 points ahead of Mercedes, then all of a sudden you've got a bit of an issue on your hand. So
Yeah.
for me, I think I would go for it, but it is very close, like you said.
It's line ball. It is line ball. I will say that. I think it really depends on how qualifying and the race pace shakes out, but it'll be a tricky one. I think, and kind of on the theme of Ferrari, to answer Max's point around whether it's Leclerc or Ferrari is the pick, it has to be Ferrari for me. You're getting kind of 2 lots of Ferrari production. Again, it depends on the second constructor, but if you're in a vacuum deciding over 1 Ferrari driver or 2, I'm picking Ferrari for this week.
I agree.
We talked about Zhou and Bottas already, I think. So, Carla, I'm picking Zhou, but I don't really think it's going to be much in it just for the grid penalty alone, guaranteed P20 start. And, there'll probably be a few DNFs at Baku. So hopefully he can finish
100%,
or so. And then you mentioned the Ferrari pit stops. Matej asked, Norris, Ferrari, McLaren. Do I take Russell or Piastri for a second premium? Don't have the budget for Leclerc. I think most people are moving towards, if they're not already on second premium driver lineup. So I'd say that's probably the right approach for this weekend.
Yeah, 100%. I think as well, a lot of people are asking, especially with the Zhou versus Bottas situation. So we've spoken about it. I think we both agreed that Zhou probably was the better option. But also, you've got to think long term. So for everyone's teams, because especially for me, there's going to be quite a few changes going about where going into Singapore, I will only have 2 free transfers. And I think if you are pushing away from having triple McLaren this weekend, I think you've got to be careful and make sure you've got that value ready to go back to a McLaren sort of build, because I do think Singapore, like Hungary, McLaren's always looked pretty good at those sorts of tracks. So you've got to think long term as well.
I think as well, if it was any normal week where there wasn't quite a high DNF risk and it was just P1 to P20, normal running order, look at Monza, for example, only 1 DNF, Sonoda at the back with that retirement. I'd usually say Bottas of the 2 because he has averaged more points than Zhou since, I think he's outscored Zhou in every race since Spain, if I'm not mistaken. And his price decreases because Sauber are objectively the worst car on the grid. His drops are much less than Zhou. Zhou usually goes down 0.2. Bottas usually 0.1 unless it's a bad race for him too. So I think, to your point around budget, Bottas is probably my pick for preserving it, even though Zhou's typically more at risk. But I think this weekend in particular, you throw in the grid penalty, you throw in the higher likelihood of more DNFs on track. We haven't had that many the last few weeks. I think Zhou's, if there's now a time more than ever, probably on for a half a shot at a price increase. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's probably his best chance he's had in about 6 or 7 races. We'll answer a few more questions, and we'll try and cover off a few of the team lineups that have been submitted on FanAmp.
So I see a question from First Cut. So who's your pick for driver of the day? And honestly, it's no one's like special Grand Prix, for instance. So there's no like home bias. So it's literally just who's going to come first for me. And for me, that is Leclerc or Norris.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I'd say it's got to be one of the lead drivers for Ferrari or McLaren at the moment, unless this was something I thought about, and I don't think anyone really talked about it because after FP1, FP2, the hype around Red Bull died down. But would a win from Max at Baku put him on the radar for driver of the day? Or is
I
that
I
is completely removed from the
eh,
reality right now?
I think for once he could actually get driver of the day for winning, which is an incredible thought to think how many wins he's got, and he still doesn't get driver of the day for it. But I think considering what his last race win was in June,
That's right, Spain, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, 100%. If he does win, he'll be getting driver of the day 100%.
Got it. Yep, yep. I back that. I'm just not sure he's got quite the same fan base as the Lando Norrises and
Yeah.
Leclercs of the world. All right, where were we in the chat? We'll maybe answer one or two more questions, one more question, and then we'll take a look at a few lineups.
So I've seen someone say Behrman driver of the day. He's replacing Kevin Magnussen.
Mm,
I would be shocked. He
mm,
would have to have an incredible race. And from what we've seen so far, he hasn't looked incredibly off the pace. He's
mm.
just looked prone to mistakes.
Yeah, he had I know I said before I missed free practice 3, but I think he had a run in as well in that session. So I think even if he was half a chance at driver of the day in Baku, his price just dissuades anyone from owning him. I think he's a one race punt. He'd have to be half the price for me to even consider Behrman for a single week in the Haas. And at 15 million, I just think there's more important things to prioritize this week in transfers than
Yeah.
someone like Ollie Behrman.
Incredible that he's a premium driver.
Yeah, unbelievable, to be honest. Dilip asks, what's your thoughts on Perez? Now, this is something I've talked about a little bit. I do like Checo at this track. He's won it twice. He's been on the podium the last 3 years, and he had top 3 times in FP1 and FP2. I personally think, in my opinion, of the 3 Red Bull assets, if you want to take a punt on one, Perez is my pick. I wouldn't say it's by a country mile, but he is at a price point that makes a move from Piastri or Sainz or Hamilton into Perez in a one trade move. So I think if you want to gamble on a Red Bull asset as a differential, no one inside the top 10,000 is going to own Checo, let alone many Red Bull assets. I think that's half a shout. Probably carries a little bit of risk because we know what he's like on his bad days, but he will take confidence, I think, coming to Azerbaijan with his track record here.
Yeah. It's just one of those things with Perez, isn't it? You never know where he's going to be.
Yeah.
But we'll see how he does. I'm hoping he has a decent race, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see for sure. All right, we'll take a look at a few of the teams that has been submitted on our fantasy formula based on FanApp. Be sure to submit your lineup there if you'd like it reviewed on the stream today. We've got a few to get through, so we'll kick this one off. The first submission is from Gman1227. He's got a team that has Kevin Magnussen in it, obviously needs to prioritize transfers elsewhere. It looks as though his first option, he's got the pick of Esteban Ocon, Tsunoda, or Gasly, or instead looks like he could pivot into Behrman and Colapinto. Zach, a -10 for Behrman doesn't exactly excite me, so I suppose it's probably the pick of the drivers in option 1 if you've got to choose between the two.
100%, yeah. It's definitely option 1, but there again, none of those drivers from the selection have really blown me away.
No.
And honestly, it might sound crazy me saying this, but I think even in an option 1 situation, don't rule out Colapinto. He's been looking similar to Albon on pace this weekend. And if he gets into the top 10, that's at least 5-ish points, which is enough for a cheap driver. And I don't really see amazing pace from the Alpines. Same with the AlphaTauris. So with them, it's literally luck of the draw. They could be anywhere.
Yeah, I like that shout. I like getting Colapinto in for option 1 because then it means you're able to position your team for potentially that second premium driver in Singapore. You could downgrade Ricciardo and Hülkenberg to the Saubers maybe, and then that would mean you could bring in George Russell or or Carlos Sainz, one of those slightly more affordable premium drivers to have two, because I do think two premium drivers and say the Williams assets is going to be better than having Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Tsunoda, Gasly, etc. So I think prioritizing that to set your team up for Singapore isn't a bad strategy at all. Carlos has submitted these three lineups, all with some flavor of Red Bull. I'm trying to figure out what the common denominators are in each of these lineups. Ferrari, Zhou, Colapinto look to be the picks. Quite a few changes, so I wonder if this is for -10 or not. But let's just look at these in a vacuum without any transfer penalties.
I think for me,
yeah, there's a couple of options you could go with, isn't there?
I think option 3 is the only one I'd kind of rule out. I don't like the look of that. Just there's two, like, I love a differential team and someone risking it, but I think Perez and Russell is a little bit too ambitious.
I think, I completely agree. And I feel the same way with option 1 to an extent, because I don't really see Sainz and Perez as two drivers that are guaranteed podiums. Of the four premium options on the screen here, Piastri is probably the best shot at that. And you also get the McLaren constructor with Norris's production. So I like option 2 of the three teams on the screen here.
Yeah, I think I agree.
We've got a lot of different variations this week, haven't we? Again, need to whittle down which ones are which, but I think anything with Ferrari and McLaren are kind of where my eyes are immediately drawn towards. So I'm looking at option 2, probably option 2.
Really nice.
Yeah, I really like option 2. So that's probably my pick of these different combinations on screen here.
It's just when Mercedes are just such a weird constructor this weekend, and it's like, say for option 1 especially, I believe that is no. Option 4 is with Norris and Leclerc. Like, I do love a team with Norris and Leclerc in. It's just you got too many options there for who you're going to times 2, and then you've also got Mercedes just kind of ruining the constructors there.
Yeah, I agree. I think option 2 for us there. Faint's got two different, again, similar dilemma. Team more or less the same. And then, Leclerc or Lando Norris more or less is the top pick. So I'd probably go for McLaren. I'd probably go for Lando Norris in this situation.
Yeah, I think if you have the money, stick with the McLaren lineups, because also it's probably going to be the lineup that helps you out further down the line as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. 100%. I think Norris is a great long-term or longer-term 2x hold. So to answer a couple of questions in the chat, Norris is my pick for the best 2x option this weekend. We'll get through one or two more, and we can cover off the rest at the end of the show. Mike, stalwart of the fantasy formula and F1 fantasy channels around. I like both of these lineups. I think the similar conundrum to quite a few we've already reviewed already. That is it Leclerc Piastri? Is it Lando Leclerc? Is it Zhou? I can't fault either one. My team looks a bit more like the team on the left, but it's close.
I honestly think without the Zhou penalty and without it being Baku, like where everyone could crash, I would have lent more towards option 2. But now with Zhou not being too bad of an asset this weekend, option 1 for me is the way to go, I think.
I do think, though, that doesn't mean we should necessarily rule out Williams. Already talked about them as great midfield options. So I like Albon. I think the Williams upgrades seem to be working. Colapinto at 5.3 is a great enabler, and Albon's probably my pick of the midfield teams to crack Q3 this week. So I do like both, but yeah, probably for this week I like the left, but I wouldn't fault Mike for going for either of them. We might actually then pivot back to the chat. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we've missed. For those asking, Adam has posted his team on X. If you want to check that out, I'll bring it up actually now that we've already mentioned it. Maybe we could also cover off a few more questions in the chat in the meantime, Zach, and go from there.
Yeah, of course.
There we go. So I'll bring Adam's lineup for those of you asking. But he's gone for triple McLaren, double Sauber, and Ferrari. So my team's somewhat similar. I was actually thinking about a lineup like this weekend, but elected not to.
I like this lineup, honestly. It's very much one for the future as well. And again, like I said, not having Norris and Leclerc in one lineup makes it very easy for your two times. It's the scary thing of having two Saubers, isn't it? I'm always scared at seeing two Saubers, but with desperate times, if you can get those drivers in with two Saubers, it's 100% worth it, especially with Ferrari as a constructor as well on that team.
I think Adam's got a bit more budget than me, and I've got even less budget than that. So I'm running this. I could run this lineup, but I'd have probably less. I'd probably have 0.5 million less than what Adam would have in the bank. So again, you're probably having to eat budget or price drops, unless, of course, as we said before, Zhou makes up positions from DNFs ahead of him. I'll put up the Fantasy Tool Sims again, and we'll go through a few more questions. Derpy Cakes asked, what's the question for the giveaway? That is at the bottom of the screen here. Comment in our fan amp base to win $25 to Fifth Gear Garms. Is Sargent in your team this weekend? Who is the best replacement for Logan Sargent? All right. I've lost my stamp in the chat because obviously with the lineups, I think we were probably
yeah, it's still a lot of people asking about thoughts on Mercedes, and just I think we've basically covered that. Ferrari look like the better option. If you can't afford them, I think Ferrari is still worth having over, even if it ruins a few of your like middle cheap drivers. Say, for instance, you had Hulkenberg. I would 100% drop Hulkenberg down to a Sauber to bring in Ferrari, Mercedes.
Yeah, agreed. I haven't really seen anything from Hulk to suggest he's an objectively better option than, say, one of the Williams drivers or even the Sauber drivers like Zhou this weekend. So I'd look at moving out Haas drivers for this week. Okay, where else are we at the chat? Would you use wildcard to get Norris, Leclerc, and McLaren, Ferrari? John's asking. I think that's perfectly fine, to be honest. I did exactly that last weekend in Monza to get 1 week ahead of double Ferrari, and I really like what they're bringing to the table this weekend. So I think that's a perfectly fine use of the chip. I think as well, the longer we leave the wildcard in the season, the less and less value it will probably have. So get it out of the way in the next few weeks if you're looking to use it.
Yeah. I agree, honestly, especially with that. If you can, because with wildcard, if you can't move to a much better team than you already have, it's not really worth it. But if you can get to Norris, Leclerc, McLaren, Ferrari, that is, for me, that is the best lineup you can have.
Definitely.
As a team.
Yeah, I wish I could get to Leclerc. So very envious.
Same here.
Very envious of people who manage. I think as well. I was looking at this lineup last week in Monza, and I could have got to it with the Logan Sargent loophole, but in hindsight, probably was a bit lucky that they changed the rules and I wasn't having to kind of put out that fire this week. So it's kind of, it comes with, the ebbs and flows of F1 fantasy. All right, where else were we? Here we go. Triple McLaren and Ferrari versus Leclerc, McLaren, Ferrari. I think you said, Zach, it's probably line ball, but Leclerc would be an optimal pick if you could get to that.
100%, especially for this weekend.
Definitely. I couldn't. Oh, sorry, go on.
Just and then with that lineup, it's just picking the times too. But yeah, that's it.
As well, Ali, I couldn't find any news on the Leclerc penalty. It was speculated. I think Terry F1 Coffee Corner mentioned it was possible, but pouring through my Twitter screen on the other side, I can't see any announcements on that. So if anyone sees any concrete news on the Leclerc grid penalty, feel free to let us know, because I haven't seen anything just yet.
I've seen a question from Epa about what do you think about Red Bull and McLaren as constructors? And it's one of those things where, first of all, Red Bull just is way too expensive, and it really pushes down your like pricing on anything else you can really afford to have in your team. Which is the main issue with having Red Bull. But also, what I'm really worried about Red Bull right now is they're probably not going to have the best qualifying if they've had this like race setup made for them to go into, because that's apparently what they've been trying to get to go for. But then I think if they really are struggling on the straights, they might get stuck behind like the Mercedes, for instance, if they're in like fifth or sixth, or even a Sainz. And then even if they are fast, they might have to try different strategies, and it's just more chance for more screw ups from them. And yes, fastest pit stops potentially could go to Red Bull more often than not. I just think Red Bull's too much of a risk to bring in, considering how much it ruins the rest of your team as well.
Yep, I agree. If you look at the constructors here on the right-hand side of the screen, you're just getting more value for money in the points per dollars or points per million spent for Ferrari and Mercedes than you are for Red Bull. So I think even though they have looked a little cheeky as a differential pump this weekend, you'd probably need to be sure that this form is going to continue in the race, and I'm not 100% sure that's likely yet, unless we see podiums on the Sunday. A couple of questions around the lineups. First cut asked that I've just posted my team on Twitter for the weekend. I've decided to make no transfers, which seems awfully passive.
Ooh.
Which I'll bring it up actually, Zach, so you can have a look too. But I've got, 24 minutes until the deadline. This is, hang on, I've got the wrong screen up foolishly. This is my team for the week, guys. It does feel a little conservative. I don't think I've ever done a week where I've made no transfers. I would usually almost always make one. But the option for me this week, as you can see here on screen, was to go from Sainz and Albon to Piastri and Bottas. I'm 0.1 million or 0.2 million short of going Leclerc Bottas. But I do think, as we've talked about already, double Sauber looks a little bit doesn't fill me with confidence. I know Adam wants to take a punt on Piastri Bottas this week. I could have done that, but I like Williams. I think Albon's due a decent race in fantasy terms as well.
It's quite funny as well how similar our team lineups have ended up being. I mean, it's similar, but completely different as well, because it's the two premium drivers that we've completely gone for the other teammates. Everything else is the same, but I've gone for Leclerc and Piastri with the Leclerc ×2.
I could have done that too, but I think for me, I will probably hold Norris for the next few races, because I do think he is a great 2x option to have. But you're more likely, Zach, to get a few more budget increases, at least out of Piastri for the next few races.
And especially as well, I made sure that's also what helped me pick Zhou, because if I pick Bottas, I can't bring
Norris.
If everything stays the same, it won't, but it will be similar. If I picked Bottas, I won't be able to bring Norris back in next week. And more likely than not, next weekend, I will be bringing back Norris, probably dropping Albon down and bringing Norris back with Norris and Piastri.
Great. Yeah, I like the forward planning, and that's kind of how my approach has been for the last few weeks, to get to a team like this where I'm not stuck with the three lowest valued drivers in the game. But I do think Leclerc and Piastri, as both B tier assets right now, have quite a bit more value to obviously unlock. Obviously, Leclerc should go into the A tier next weekend, but regardless,
hopefully,
I'd be very surprised if not the case. So that's my team. I had Adams up on the screen before, and Zach, I assume you haven't locked yours in. You probably want to give it a bit more time until we're absolutely certain.
I have locked in my team.
Okay.
It's not posted on Twitter yet. I can post it right now for you, actually.
Or you can tell us. Or you can tell us. Up to you.
So it will be Leclerc ×2, Oscar Piastri, Alex Albon, Zhou Guanyu, Colapinto, McLaren, and Ferrari.
Great. That's a lineup for the ages, I think, for Baku.
I know. I'm very scared about the Leclerc ×2, but we're going to power through, because I know qualifying's not going to be an issue. It's just, I just have such a bad feeling that there's going to be a crash at the front of the field.
Definitely.
And with Leclerc's luck, I wouldn't be surprised if it was him.
I know, and I think people are going to be out murdering me with pitchforks. There's one, I'm not going to name the names, but there's two drivers actually that have avoided a DNF in every Grand Prix race so far this season. And I just have a gut feeling that at least one of their luck is up this weekend. So I'm not going to name names, because I think all of you will probably come for my body. But I do suspect that this track does worry me. I do think there is a lot of risk there, and that's not been a reason in my decision making this weekend. But I do think that we will see some unsuspecting carnage. It could even affect the drivers at the front of the field as well. You could see, Norris, you could see Leclerc, you could see Hamilton, Russell, Verstappen, whoever it might be, get tangled up, and that's going to throw a spanner in the works for sure. So I think it will be,
Yeah, sorry. Even going back like further years as well, the amount of crazy podiums we've had at Baku, it just further solidifies that there could be a big crash at the front. And
definitely.
It scares me playing F1 Fantasy at a racetrack like this, but we power through.
We do. I think if you're worried, you throw on the autopilot as a hedge against DNF risk to your 2X, and no negative. Jezelik asked, Williams asked, a few other people have asked. I think no negative has a lot of upside at this track. I'd usually recommend sprints, as we talked about before, but I think Baku has a particular concern for me. So I think that's why I'm leaning towards people running the no negative this weekend. I'll bring the simulations up again for anyone that hasn't seen them on F1 Fantasy Tools. Let's cover off a few more questions in the chat, Zach. Unless, of course, there's anything that we've obviously overlooked that you want to cover off.
Actually, just with the best teams it's showing on F1 Fantasy Tools, I'm quite surprised. I mean, I understand because of how well he did in Free Practice 3, but a lot of Russell I'm seeing in those teams, and especially with him he had quite a few like small issues with the car. Especially, he even mentioned in FP3 that he was hearing weird noises with the car. I don't think I've spoken about that a lot, but Russell is a very scary option to put in because, again, DNFs and Baku, he might just have a faulty car.
He's had his moments so far this season, the disqualification in Spa and then the water leak issue in Silverstone. So there are probably, I mean, this is for a budget of 121, which is for my team slightly on the lower side. But let's say if we go up to 123, what does that look like? I'd say there's probably a bit more Ferrari McLaren.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So Russell's a bit further down the order, but quite frankly, I think you're going for Leclerc or Piastri. And I think, as we've talked about, Leclerc is probably our pick for this weekend if you can stretch to him and Norris. That probably also answers questions around Leclerc and Norris. Got a couple of fans of yours in the chat, Zach.
Still a lot of questions on Zhou and Bottas. We've answered that quite a bit. Yeah,
Zhou's our pick for this week for sure. Yeah. For sure. We might quickly go back to a few lineups that we haven't had a chance to look at. Then we'll obviously pivot to our giveaway for the week, and then that might bring us to the end of the show, more or less. Joe's lineup, a couple of different combinations, but I think, Zach, to your point, we could absolutely rule out the George Russell lineup on the right-hand side. Yeah. I think, again, we're seeing a lot of these lineups. I think it's, Leclerc, Piastri, which I think is your team more or less on the left, right?
That is basically my team, but Bottas, Zhou instead of Bottas, yeah.
So I think we like both of them, to be honest, Joe. So
I do like both of them. I do have to admit, it is because I couldn't afford Norris and Piastri, but I really do think it's one of those things. It depends how risky you want to be, and where you are in the league standings and what I guess your goals are for this season. Because if you're like sort of happy where you are and you think, okay, let's play it safe, don't do anything stupid, then 100% triple McLaren would be a nice playing it safe way to go. But that Leclerc ×2 just looks so exciting. And the thought of not many people having that Leclerc ×2, potentially even Leclerc in their team, makes it even more enticing.
Yeah, definitely agree. Definitely agree. Well, his last week has what we'd expect to be a B tier asset. So try and maximize that price increase for this weekend if he has a good race. Okay, bit going on this screen.
Yeah.
I think it's a Ferrari or Mercedes, and then the driver pairing in the top section.
I see. Leclerc, Hulkenberg.
I think it's...
Well, I'm trying to get my head around this.
So am I. McLaren, Leclerc, and question mark, and Bottas, and Ferrari or Mercedes. I think
for both teams. Sorry, yeah.
No, go on.
I think for both teams, definitely the easy option, the easy one to answer is Ferrari over Mercedes on both of them.
Definitely, yes.
And then I'm assuming though that would mean you wouldn't have enough money for. Well, the issue is I don't know the team value for both these teams. But if you could afford Lando and Leclerc with McLaren and Ferrari, that's the way to go. But if you couldn't, Piastri is still a good option on that option B.
Yeah, agreed. I think the right team with Ferrari and any of the McLaren or Mercedes options. I'd say the right team if you put Ferrari in over Mercedes and then you put in Lando or Oscar with Charles. I think that's a perfectly fine lineup on the right-hand side. Jeremy's got his team here again, almost mirror images more or less of ours, but I think again gravitating towards the right-hand side with that McLaren Ferrari pairing.
Oh, that is just that Mercedes, man. And it really does change my entire opinion on it because I very much do love Norris and Leclerc, but as soon as you see that Mercedes, yeah, that's too much of a risk. 100%, I would go with the right option.
Yep, definitely. I think George Russell looks like the driver in question here that I wouldn't actually be going with Russell, to be quite fair with you. I actually like the Monza team of the three on screen here.
Completely agree. I mean, that would also leave you with free transfers for next week as well, which is a lot of movement for a team. So yeah, honestly, it's one of those things where, especially with the cheap drivers, because I think option 1 and 2, they're focusing on more changing the cheap drivers. But I don't think that's really too much of an issue right now, especially if you had Norris and Leclerc. Wow.
Definitely. No, I love this team on the left. If you feel confident with not making a move, and that's what I've done this week. Can't believe I'm saying it, but that's where I'm at right now. And then just a couple of drinks. The last one that we've got for this week, again. Oh, okay. This is an interesting one for you, Zach, because I've got a team on the left, but swapped Ferrari for Mercedes. The team on the right has George Russell, but it's George Russell and Ferrari for Carlos Sainz and Mercedes. I think let's discount the one on the right-hand side because I know we've spoken a lot about Ferrari over Mercedes for this weekend. So it's very much Sainz and Mercedes or Russell, Ferrari and a -10.
That is a really difficult one. Purely because of that -10. It's because I was going to say without the -10, Sainz, Russell, similar points, easy peasy. So it really does depend on it. Like that question we had before of, is it worth taking the -10 to get from a Mercedes to Ferrari? Now, I think I was venturing more on the it is worth it. So I think I would. But then Russell and his issues with the car. It is a really difficult one, that.
It is, isn't it?
I think I would. To be fair, I like to play it quite risky, so I think I would go the middle one. But that is just me being extremely risky, though.
If I'm going to try and simplify it using a basic formula. It's the left-hand side is if we remove Carlos Sainz and George Russell from both teams, it's to me Leclerc, versus Leclerc and a -10 versus Hamilton. If we're removing pit stops and all of that from the equation, it's Hamilton on the left versus Leclerc and a -10 on the right. Does Leclerc outscore Hamilton by -10, by 10 points? I don't think so.
Yeah, that is really close. But then
Yeah.
it's one of those things where if you have 2 times on Leclerc, then that -10 would potentially be worth it.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Mm.
It's a tricky one. But I think that should do it for teams this week. So thanks for everyone for submitting their teams in the Fantasy Formulas fan out base. We had a lot of different questions this week, so I think we've done our best to cover all of them off. I will bring up the Sims one more time, and we will give you 1 or 2 more minutes before we do the giveaway for this week, and then we'll use the last 5-10 minutes, Zach, to answer any last-minute burning questions.
I think as well, going into this weekend, it's just one of those weekends I'm really excited about, especially F1 fantasy-wise, because of just how, like I mentioned a little bit before, just how many different teams we're going to have. Like, I just love races where we get complete different teams. Like, it just makes F1 fantasy so much better. And when at the start of the season, especially when we thought it was just going to be a full-on Verstappen, Red Bull, someone else, those sorts of lineups, it's just incredible how far it's gone this season.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think as well, you look at last season where it was Red Bull, Aston Martin for the first half, Red Bull, McLaren for the second half. There wasn't really that much disparity except for maybe the odd midfield driver or second premium driver. But this year, we've had so much variety. The ranks are swinging non-stop. And I think that's what's made fantasy so fun and what has made the game so playable up until obviously this week with the Sargent dilemma. I think it's been, in my opinion, we've put the last week of mistakes from F1 aside, it's, in my opinion, been the most enjoyable fantasy season I've had so far. So I hope that the decisions and the variety continues for the rest of the season, because I think it's been super tricky week to week.
A lot of questions as well. I'm seeing in the chat for, again, final answers on where everyone's thinking of the 2 times, Leclerc or Norris.
I think for me it's Norris, but I think you're more optimistic on Leclerc. I like if you can own both, I think that's our pick for this week. If you can get to Leclerc and Norris, but I'm gonna say Norris just because I think it's slightly. I think McLaren's just got slightly more consistent race pace, but go Leclerc for, I think, is a cheeky 2x punt if you want to take that risk.
I know. Obviously, I've got a little bit of bias in my team. Obviously, having Leclerc rest of the time too, so I'll always be a little bit more onto that side.
Definitely. All right. Well, we'll quickly do the giveaway, Zach. Then we'll jump in to cover off the last questions for the week. These are all our entrants for this week. So I'll click the wheel and hopefully we have a win for someone lucky. Okay. Congrats to Silent Sinner for this week's winner of the Fantasy Formula giveaway. We'll be in touch with details of the prize. So thanks to everyone that participated this week. We'll be back next deadline stream with very much the same again. So looking forward to having more of you guys enter your enter into the giveaway. I'm trying to get my mark on the stream, but I think, again, to your point, there are mostly questions around the 2x for this week. I think, we've still got 5 minutes, so don't feel like you guys don't have to leave. We're here until the deadline.
I believe there's one question from Matt Gregory asking about, I need budget so bad on my main team, only 115, while my second team was 122. Budget wise, I think you go for something similar to what I'm going for. I'd think you try to get that 1 million increase from Leclerc or Piastri.
Yeah, I don't think if you're a lower budget team, that focusing on the A tiers is your way to get a bit more budget. I think, as you say, Zach, Leclerc. I mean, let's for argument's sake, for a lower budget team, let's just drop this in the team calculator in fantasy for this week. I think it would probably not have quite enough to get to. Okay, that's interesting.
Norris and Red Bull, very interesting. I would I would definitely not go for anything. I don't think I'd go
No,
for any of those top 10 teams.
it's probably got to be this team then. And then
Mm.
at that point though, you're gambling on Alonso as I wouldn't call it a premium, but a half premium.
I
But even
think
he's,
what
yeah,
they've got right there is double Williams budget wise seems like a great
mm,
option.
mm,
Zhou
Joe,
again for a small sort of potential.
mm,
But then honestly, I think it's Norris when you're that low on budget, you're sort of at like a threshold of how many points you can get anyway. So then I
mhm,
do think it's a time for when you risk it with Leclerc
definitely.
and just go bananas at it and just try with Leclerc.
Yeah, yeah, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Try and extract as much value out of the B tier 2X and have a risk there. But that's just for the lower teams to answer the question in the chat from Matt Gregory. So most people are probably closer to his second team of 122, 123 for this week. Get those teams locked in, guys. We're 5 minutes from the deadline. I posted mine on Twitter. Zach's mentioned his on stream earlier. And it probably is going to be Blue Sky Racing, as Sammy's pointed out in the chat. So hopefully no instances where there is a concern. Jason has asked, Albon, Colapinto, Norris, Leclerc, Zhou, McLaren, Mercedes. Would you drop Norris for Piastri to swap Mercedes for Ferrari? I think that's your lineup for the week, Zach, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah. If you change Norris to Piastri for Mercedes for Ferrari, that is that is exactly my team. So obviously, again, with a little bit of bias, I think that's an amazing team. But with all seriousness, I do think, I still think changing Mercedes to Ferrari would be the better option.
Yeah, definitely. Monkey Boy 28 asked, I accidentally applied the wildcard after doing transfers. Will I get negative points? Well, I think that depends on if you've got Sargent in your team or not. If you've applied the wildcard, though, you could just remove Sargent if he's in your team. If you've, I assume unless you mean negative transfers, so minus 10 points for those extra transfers, the wildcard will remove those extra transfer penalties. So I wouldn't stress about penalty points. And if you've got the wildcard active and you've got Magnussen or Sargent, I would just transfer them out on wildcard. And I think we answered Akshay's question if someone asked it earlier around Mercedes to Ferrari for a minus 10. I think that's perfectly okay this weekend.
Yeah,
it's going to be it's close. It'll be close though.
I'm seeing the latest chat from sorry for pronunciation, Jezza K, saying minus 10 because of what we're saying. So I'm very much hoping it works out for you.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
Full-heartedly believe it will. But yeah.
I do think Leclerc has a much better chance at a podium than either of the Mercedes drivers, and I'd say Sainz has an equal chance at a podium as Hamilton and Russell. So I think that probably edges it. And if Ferrari get a driver of the day, then or a fastest lap, fingers crossed. Pit stops as well. You mentioned that before, Zach. Ferrari have pit stop upside that Mercedes just doesn't have.
Yeah.
So that's it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think we got to just about every question. So get those teams locked in, guys. It's been a tricky week, but I think the fact that we're more or less back on Ferrari and McLaren after what could have been a Red Bull themed week after FP1 and FP2 makes me think it's full steam ahead for the weekend and on to Singapore afterwards.
Very excited for this weekend. I mean, not even F1 fantasy wise, this is going to be just a great weekend for racing. A lot of talking points to get through.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for dropping by. Huge thanks to Zach, obviously, for filling in instead of Terry and Adam. So a great week, another great stream in the books, and hopefully we see all of you in the chat for next deadline stream in Singapore.